the new stone's arrived, so it's time to start prepping the chisels. With chisels, we don't put a micro bevel on the flat side. That's so that when using the chisel, we can cut perfectly flat while running the chisel along on the flat side. If the blade was slightly elevated, that wouldn't work. So the first step is to grind off all of the machining marks from the factory. Now, these are not brand new, and it looks like some of my sharpening efforts have done a lot of that already, so maybe this will be a bit quick. I'm going to start on 1000. Well, on this one I can already see that we're getting nice polishing here and here, but there's a bit of a raised spot here and here, so perhaps a bit more work after all. This has now got even scratches all over the flat side. Well, for the benefit of anyone as new to this as me, stay right away from that little ski jump. It ruins everything at the tip. And for narrower chisels, this is just the 1/2 inch, haven't even started on the 1/4 inch yet. Put a lot of in and out into it, not just side to side, because otherwise you'll rock it as I just did and have a bit of a crown. So a lot of in and out, but not in and out enough to get to there over the edge. I'm calling that it on the 300. Unsurprisingly, the 1/4 inch gets there a lot faster. And all of that before we even get to the starting point where the Cosman method begins. Remember, all of that was on 300. Cosman says to start with 1000. Cosman says to use the 1000 to get rid of machining marks, but of course I'm doing it to get rid of all of the 300 scratches I just put in. I'm going to call that good on the 1 inch. Happy with that. And finally the 1/4 inch, where we don't want any side to side at all. This is 3000 on one side and 8000 on the other. First thing is, this stone seems to wear away a lot more. And the second thing is that its scratches seem to be a little bit uneven in size. So rather than moving up the grits, it's moving out into a wider spectrum of them. This is of course a much cheaper stone. The quality of these scratch lines is just not up to what we saw on the diamond stone and what I hope to see when we get to 16,000 on the Shapton.
Let's skip the bit where I messed up the edge and had to re-establish the primary bevel.
You didn't see that. I do believe we are solving that little micro bevel, almost certainly caused by riding up onto that little ski jump. It's kind of mirroring up a bit, but it's not even. So are we flat? There's a bow in the stone. I think the answer is that when levelling the stone, you've got to make very small movements rather than large ones. That is certainly improving things, visibly with a straight edge to a light source. This thing either glides, doing no cutting at all, or digs in and stops. The purpose of getting a mirror sheen on the flat of the chisel is A, so that when you are cutting a flat piece of wood, it can dig in while parallel. And secondly, when we remove the burr without using the steel rule trick that you saw me using before, we can do it by just going across that flat back. This is starting to look pretty good. Not perfect, and not what Cosman would put on one of his websites, but I'm pretty happy with it. But the way this 16,000 grit stone works is weird. The way it feels. 3 more to go. Here are my 5 key takeaway lessons from back of chisel one-time prep. Number 1, perfectly flat tools are much better than any possible alternative. Number 2, keep your finger right here when doing it at all times to prevent the side of the stone from riding up on that little bevel there, because it will elevate the tool and you'll put a micro bevel on the flat side, which is exactly what we don't want. Rule number 3, a lot of in and out strokes, not so much side to side or circle or anything else, especially on narrow chisels. Rule number 4, in between grits, particularly with the soft clay stones, wipe off all remaining slurry before going up to the next grit. And rule number 5, when levelling the 16,000, small strokes, short strokes, no long strokes, or you'll crown it. True confessions. As you can see, I don't have the low-level sharpening station, and the skill of finding a primary bevel and locking it in and grinding in that secondary bevel is something that I fear I don't have. So I tried a no-skill hack and it didn't work. I filmed it, but I'm not going to show you. Instead, I'm going to try another one, and for this I'll be needing the Stanley Roller Sharpening Guide. So I'm putting the chisel inside the roller guide. I'm moving it to 25-degree mark. I'm double checking that that angle perfectly aligns with the primary bevel. I'm then pulling it back from that mark by about 3 millimeters, and then tightening it. After doing that, I'm using this square thing to check that the chisel is perfectly aligned in the guide. Now, it's made complex by the fact that when you tighten it, it bows this piece of metal. So I'm checking both sides and splitting the difference, just getting it as good as I possibly can. The idea is consistency. It's more important. I also want to make sure it's very tight because I don't want it to move during this step. I then run it across the 1000. And check to see how square it is. And I'll either adjust it or fix it just by leaning on one side. And I want to get an even 1 millimeter strip across the edge of the blade, and also feel a burr on the back. That's looking quite good. I will now loosen it up and draw it back a further 2 millimeters. Tighten it again. Check for squareness again. We'll do the same thing on the 16,000. What I want to see is a bright line against the very edge of the blade going all the way along. Now, if my squaring is being good, I can fine-tune it just by leaning on one corner or the other. That's looking good, and I've got a burr. So we remove it. Burr is gone. Chisel is sharp. I've just done the 3/4 and the 1/2 inch. One of them near perfect, the other meh. Very good. And that's it. So there you have it. A complete noob who doesn't follow instructions can get fairly good results out of the Rob Cosman sharpening method, or at least a hacked no-skill variant of it. For planes, leaving a guide on so that you just have to judge the distance rather than the absolute angle helps. For spoke shaves, my variant that uses a thinner replacement for the ruler for removing the burr off the flat side works just perfectly. And for chisels, my hybrid method, a cross between the traditional method and the Rob Cosman method, also gives very good results. It's not as fast as the proper Rob Cosman freehand, but it is a lot faster than the traditional way where you are working on the primary bevel at all times. I may, at some time in the future, build a low-level sharpening station and attempt to hone up my freehanding skills, but as of right now, I have no excuse to do any work with a tool that is not perfectly sharp.
Stop the press!
A last-minute comment interrupting a completely different video. You just saw me performing those sharpening steps on a set of virginal primary bevels, cutting in the secondary bevels for the very first time. You may be prompted to ask, with good reason, what about when we need to resharpen? We're not cutting those bevels for the first time. Is it going to be any different? The way I see it is that the 1000 step, that's when we just raise it the first little bit, the purpose of that will be to erase the existing 16,000 bevel against the very edge, and then of course the second step is to put it back again. It may take just slightly more grinding to do so. That's my expectation. If I find out any different, I'll let you know. Cheers.